Hi, and welcome. My name is Lena Sherman, and I would like to welcome you all to this talk show at World Water Week. It's called Unlocking Financial Sustainability of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, SMEs, to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 6. We know that 4 billion people lack access to basic sanitation services. 2 billion lack access to clean and safe drinking water. It's huge numbers. And there are hardly any resources more precious and more important than water and achieving access to water and sanitation. It's a key enabler for sustainable development. And this talk show will demonstrate how a key segment of small and medium-sized enterprises can make a difference to achieve some of the sustainable development goals, while are ripe for investments. And with me, I have Kajetan Hetzer, Director of the Waste Foundation, an organization that runs programs to catalyze sustainable solutions to urban challenges locally. And you are also Program Director of the Take a Stake Fund initiative, which is working with WASH and Waste, small growing businesses, proving the investment case and mobilizing finances. Welcome. And Daniel Yen, you are the CEO of Spouts International, and we will hear more about that later, what that is. And David Berner, Global Director for Product Strategy and Investor Relations, at Yunus Social Business Fund, a Berlin-based impact venture capital fund that invests in developing countries. Most welcome. And Daniel, I start with you, and you can describe what is Spouts.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lena. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here at World Water Week in Stockholm. It's my first time here. So for Spouts, we are a social enterprise, and we manufacture and distribute ceramic water filters in Uganda. So we came from very humble beginnings. Our story started actually back in 2011, 2012, when we started off in a factory. It was a factory slash office slash, I would say, residence that was about 200 square meters. And half of the residence was where our machines were, where we stayed. But then the other half was about 200 chickens. And that's what I mean by humble beginnings. Like, we came from very little. And then we did about 3 years of research and development to develop the technology of ceramic water filters in Uganda. And since then, so we sold and distributed our first filter in 2015. And since then, we've been able to distribute over 220,000 water filters, providing over 1.2 million people with long-term access to safe drinking water. We're a social enterprise, as I mentioned, so we're very mission-driven. And our mission as an organization is to provide long-term access to safe drinking water and clean energy to all Africans. About 2 years ago, it was to all Ugandans, because we were just based in Uganda. About a year ago, it was to all East Africans, because we expanded to Rwanda in addition to Uganda. But we recently changed our mission statement to include all of Africa, because we are scaling throughout all of sub-Saharan Africa, to Nigeria, to West Africa, to Southern Africa, Mozambique. I would say we're just getting started with our mission as an organization and accomplishing that. We're in a very rapidly scaling phase right now as an organization, and really excited about what's to come to achieve our 2030 vision, which is to reach 6 million households, providing over 35 million people with long-term access to safe drinking water. So I'm really excited to be here today. I'll go into more of the details of our mission and our vision later on.
Yeah, but I just have to ask you, how did you get the first idea?
So it started way back when our co-founder, Kathy Koo, stayed at a host family and saw how they were treating their water. It was boiling it. People were still getting sick, wasting a lot of time, a lot of finances on treating their water. So she went back to Harvard University, where she was studying at the time, and then did about a year's worth of research and development to define a locally sustainable solution, which was the ceramic water filters. So it started by us actually living on the ground and experiencing the challenges from the households.
Kajetan, you work with small and medium-sized enterprises, but you work also with a particular type, the SGB. What is that?
Yeah, it's called small and growing businesses. But first, let me stress the importance of the segment of SMEs in general, this type of companies, which are crucial for employment, regional economic growth, but they lack support all over, funding, capacity building, whatever. So these type of companies are varying between very small micro enterprises to somewhat larger. I'm not talking about multinationals. They're looking for investment something between $20,000 up to a few million. And the segment of SGBs, small and growing businesses, like sports of water, is in that segment. So it's still quite a big bucket. But it's also called, for reasons, the missing middle, because they are too large for microfinance, so they are out of the picture, but also it's still too small for institutional investors. So they don't get access to funding and got stuck, despite they are crucial. And you have heard about the impact they can generate. They are employing like 50% of the workforce in countries, sometimes 90%, more than 50%, sometimes 70% of GDP. They are also very agile and very well suited also to serve low-income communities, to reach the last mile, because they're also set up from the local context. They're not flying in from abroad, but they know the local context very well and how to reach the people. So this is why we are focusing, because they are worthwhile to be supported, they are crucial to be supported, and they are lacking out attention. Yeah.
David, from the investor's perspective, what challenges and risks are there investing in those kind of businesses?
Yeah, so there are still some challenges, let's put it this way. So I would first of all say that we are looking at a sector which is still nascent. So in terms of deal flow, it can be sometimes challenging to find business models which are attractive or also scalable and financially viable in the long term. Second, I think we're looking at a sector which is sitting somewhere very close to the government when it comes to, for instance, providing for the infrastructure needed for being successful with your business, or also as off-takers or providers to the business, and for enforcing the regulation and the policy around the business to thrive. So that can make processes slower or also a bit unpredictable. And then at the same time, also linked to that point, we're looking at a very intricately linked and intertwined value chain, which is also difficult to assess for an investor. And finally, I think we see a lot of capital going into the market that is heavily subsidized, which is somehow to a certain extent distorting the market today. So we see lenders lending at rates which are at 30% maybe of the commercial rate. And that poses a risk to the long-term financial viability of business models, because somehow they are living on steroids. So for us, it's important to put in place an ecosystem around these entrepreneurs and provide them with more than just financial support to make them thrive. That can be patient capital, flexible capital under conditions which are more accessible, but there's also linkage like networking to the governments and corporates and so on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That ultimately mitigates the risk then. Yeah.
What have investments like the one from like Take a Stakes meant to you? Are the banks lining up for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely meant a lot to us. Be very honest that without investments like Take a Stake in Spouts, I would not be here in this chair today. Like as I mentioned before, we had a very humble beginnings, living on a chicken farm, staying, just basically very humble beginnings. Very few banks, basically no banks in Africa will fund your operations, right? So these investments like Take a Stake really help us establish that foundation to really build up our commercial operations and then really just get everything started, our operations started, giving us a chance to prove ourselves. So then now, like we are today, we do have more opportunities with commercial banks, other investors. So it's basically the catalyst for a lot of our growth, and very appreciative to funds like Take a Stake for getting us to where we are right now.
Mm. But Kajetan, his story here is it highlights the need and the importance of investments like that. But when you're talking about the missing middle, is it only lack of finance that are the problems?
It's a saying, money makes the world go round, huh?
Yeah.
But not always as we want. I also like to come back to that comment here. It's not only the lack of funding, which is huge. We're talking about trillions, reaching the SDGs, but especially this missing middle. So there is a need for getting in much more capital. But there's also capital out there already existing, which can be used and should be used in a smarter way. And instead of being part of the problem, being part of the solution. But also companies, money does not alone do the trick. It's also capacity building. So we provide pre-investment TA, technical assistance, for those companies which are not yet investment ready, to get them there and to build a pipeline, because investors want to see a market, not one or two or three companies, but they want to have got a critical mass to make it worthwhile. And then also to provide technical assistance, capacity building in different ways, customized to existing portfolio companies. And that could vary from very much linked to their core business, management, financial administration, but also product development to make products better, quality assurance, or to bring in our international best practices to see how can what Spout is doing now in Uganda, how can we make that work in other countries, or how can they learn from each other.
So you can have a bigger picture, you mean? Or?
Right. So we bring our ecosystem expertise. We are out there since 40 years. So we have got a large network and large partnership basis on which we build. And then we look what is required to support before or after investments to strengthen the ecosystem of the supply chain, but also to strengthen the ecosystem of the supply chain of the funders, public, private, and to stitch it together, kind of financial engineering. And here also to beef up those companies that they match that bill, but also in a good way, in a sustainable way, that also environmental, social governance performances are in place. It's up to standards. Also that the impact measurement is right. So there are various ways how we can support, and what is required depends case by case. Mm-hmm. But capital alone is not doing the trick. Sometimes it's even doing the opposite.
Okay. Oh. But what should you say is it is in it for the investors?
I mean, Take a Stick itself is an initiative which provides for a blend of support towards the entrepreneurs, but also towards the investors itself. So I think first the challenge is getting into an investment. That is, as I mentioned before, looking at a sector which is difficult to navigate, and the deal flow is still nascent. So there's a whole expertise that the initiative will bring in about knowing the sector, about knowing the business models, knowing how to assess a business model, and then help the investor getting access to the best deals. Now, if I look at Spouts, for instance, so what has been very appealing for us there is that we have a very strong team in place, and you can see it here with this gentleman. It's just one of them. There's also very solid processing knowledge and know-how in that company. It's scalable. And we have actually brought, through the initiative, a blend of support to the table that complements capital with networking, with knowledge transfer, and that is actually what Take a Stick is supposed to be. Which is the second point, is once you are in as an investor, well, how do you manage your investment afterwards? And that is actually that knowledge that the Take a Stick initiative can bring forward, and then be a long-term partner to the success of these companies and grow them through a multitude of different support angles. And I think that is pretty much what the investor will need, looking at a sector like this where risks are still substantial but manageable.
Mm. But it's more like you get information or you get knowledge back, or
knowledge and an exciting opportunity. I think it's a sector in which we all believe a lot. So it's starting, but I think the opportunity is huge, and it's just reflected by what you said in the beginning, in the opening lines. You just need to look at how many people are still without water and without access to these basic services, and potentially you're looking at the customer base of billions of people, which can be served by business models which are very sustainable, like Daniel and Spouts.
Daniel, what have you learned on this journey, and what is next? You said it, you are growing all over Africa, but
Yeah.
what have you learned?
It's a great question. I've learned quite a lot. I've been in Uganda for about 7 years now, and now I'm traveling quite a lot between Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, where we have our operations. So short answer, learned quite a lot through a lot of the mistakes that we've made, learn from them, get back up, and then move forward. But I would say one thing that's really stuck out to me is that collaboration is key. With Take a Stake, you have Unis Social Business, you have Waste, teaming up to invest in a social enterprise like Spouts to achieve SDG 6. And that's what these conferences and everything is really about, is just how can we collaborate, how can we team up together to solve a greater issue. So that's one thing that I've really learned and really love to see. Right, it's just like-minded investors, like-minded partners who want to team up for the greater good and accomplishing something big. And maybe one example that I've really seen is that we're rapidly scaling, and we recently actually just closed a project in Rwanda where we're going to be providing over 400,000 filters to 400,000 households in Rwanda. So to kind of take a step back and look at that impact, it's 1 out of every 6 Rwandans will now have access to safe drinking water through our water filter that's locally manufactured in Uganda. So with investments like this, it really clears a path and creates that blueprint for us to follow, and that path for us to follow to achieve something significant, such as that project. So we're really excited about that, really grateful for this opportunity. And maybe just to answer your question again, it's just, I think collaboration of like-minded investors, partners, is key for us to achieving SDG 6.
Okay, then this is a success story, but what are the problems? What are the challenges really in investing in businesses like this?
Upscaling, there are too few. There's lots of potential, and this is also referring to why we are providing also pre-investment technical assistance to help building that pipeline, because the general financial industry is not coming out of their bed, so to say, if there's not a market starts with 100 million. I mean, David can sing a song about it, some a billion, and this is still cherry picking, because those companies are constrained, because they are the missing middle, so they could do if they would be enabled. So this is one of the key challenges. It's also to help or to create an enabling environment, or less disenabling environment to get started, low-hanging fruits, and to improve the enabling environment, which comes to the public sector, policies, legislation, other means, using capital in a smarter catalytic way, with incentives and disincentives. So this is where we help to bring in our diverse stakeholder approach to bring, it's a partnership effort. And so far it's also linked to SDG 17 actually, which is all about partnerships.
Okay.
So yeah, we like to scale up also with a couple of investments. We are now in the pilot stage by showcasing the champions, but also to send out the message. There are many more out there, which to create that market also, and at least to set up a fund of 100 million to reach that critical knot common investors want to see. So we are in fundraising stage, we are in pipeline development stage, and 18 years ago I was sitting here on behalf of a bank having 50 million.
Okay.
and too little investments. So it was too early, I learned. And now I'm sitting here with having the pipeline and looking for the 50 million. But now we have got the pipeline, now we have got the market at hand, so we now can do. But we need the right type of investors. Yeah.
Mm. Short, what insight would you like people to take away from this discussion? Do you have any?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of what I mentioned before, is just collaboration, partnerships are key. As you mentioned in the very beginning, there's over 2 billion people without access to safe drinking water. That's not a problem that only Spouts can solve, or many of the organizations. We have to team up. We have to be able to collaborate, find synergies to solve that issue and achieve SDG 6.
That's our time up now. Thank you so much for sharing your visions and experience and thoughts. I think this ignites hope for the future, really. With good inventions, together with brave investors, we can reach some of the SDGs. That is, now we thank all the audience at the online. And we are all staying here for questions and from the audience that are here. Thank you.